This blueprint for survival didn't develop over millions of years as conventional evolutionary theory might suggest. In fact, the speed at which Tibetans adapted to their extreme environment challenges our fundamental understanding of human evolution. What science once considered impossible, significant physiological transformation within a handful of generations, appears to be precisely what happened on the Tibetan Plateau. For most of scientific history, researchers believed meaningful evolutionary adaptations required vast stretches of time. The standard evolutionary model suggested that significant physiological changes typically needed 50,000 to 100,000 years, or roughly 2,000 to 4,000 generations, to become established in a population. This timeline seemed logical given the gradual nature of genetic mutation and selection. The textbooks I studied as a graduate student all emphasized the same principle, that major physiological adaptations require geological timescales, explains Dr. Anna Peterson, evolutionary biologist at Oxford University. We were taught that meaningful biological adaptations to extreme environments would take tens of thousands of years at minimum. The Tibetan case forces us to reconsider that fundamental assumption. When researchers began analyzing the genetic timeline of Tibetan adaptation, they discovered something remarkable. Using molecular dating techniques that examine mutation rates in DNA, scientists determined that the beneficial Denisovan variant of the EPAS1 gene spread through the Tibetan population in approximately 3,000 years. This represents just 120 generations, a mere evolutionary blink of an eye. Genetic anthropologist Dr. Marcus Chun from Stanford University has spent the last decade studying the rapid spread of adaptive genes in human populations. The selection pressure for the Denisovan EPAS1 variant in Tibetans ranks among the strongest ever documented in humans, he notes. Our models suggest individuals carrying this gene variant had a survival advantage of at least 20% per generation. That's an astonishing selective coefficient. To put this in perspective, the lactase persistence mutation that allows adults to digest milk spread through European populations with a selective advantage of approximately 5 to 10% per generation. The Tibetan adaptation occurred at least twice as rapidly. Think of evolution like a relay race. While most genetic changes pass the baton at a steady marathon pace, Tibetan adaptations sprinted forward with unprecedented speed. Beyond the EPAS1 gene, researchers have identified at least 30 other genetic modifications that appear to have spread through the Tibetan population during this same compressed time frame. These genes affect everything from blood vessel formation to metabolic efficiency. What we're seeing is a coordinated suite of genetic modifications that transformed multiple body systems simultaneously, explains Dr. Elise Wong, a human physiologist specializing in high-altitude adaptation. The conventional wisdom was that such comprehensive physiological remodeling would require at least 50,000 years. The Tibetan timeline compresses that by an order of magnitude. The extreme selective pressure of the Tibetan environment drove this evolutionary sprint. At elevations where oxygen levels are insufficient to support normal human physiology, the stakes of adaptation were literally life or death. Those without beneficial genetic variants faced severe health consequences, including higher infant mortality, maternal death during pregnancy, and reduced reproductive success. Mathematical modeling by population geneticists suggests that selection coefficients for Tibetan adaptations may have reached 25 to 30% per generation during periods of environmental stress, such as harsh winters or droughts. When selection pressure is this intense, evolution can proceed far more rapidly than we previously understood, notes Dr. Chun. The Tibetan case demonstrates that under sufficient environmental pressure, human physiology can transform drastically within just a few millennia. This accelerated timeline has profound implications for our understanding of human evolutionary potential. The Tibetan example suggests our species possesses a remarkable degree of adaptive plasticity that can be activated under intense selective pressure. Dr. Jared Williams, director of the Human Adaptation Research Institute, frames it this way. For decades, we've underestimated the speed at which our species can transform itself when survival demands it. The Tibetan timelines suggest humans may be capable of adapting to new environmental challenges much more rapidly than previously thought, perhaps within just a few thousand years rather than tens of thousands. This revised understanding has sparked intense interest from researchers studying how humans might respond to current and future environmental changes. Climate scientists and evolutionary biologists are now collaborating to model how populations might physiologically adapt to rising temperatures, changing disease patterns, and altered food supplies. The Tibetan example gives us reason for cautious optimism about human adaptive capacity, explains Dr. Sarah Henderson, who studies adaptation to climate change at the University of California. While we shouldn't expect genetic solutions to all environmental challenges, the speed of Tibetan adaptation suggests our species may have more biological resilience than we previously recognized. The implications extend to humanity's potential future beyond Earth. Researchers at space agencies are studying the Tibetan adaptation timeline to understand how rapidly humans might adapt to extraterrestrial environments. If meaningful physiological adaptations can occur within 120 generations on Earth, similar time frames might apply to potential human colonies on Mars. The Tibetan case also challenges conventional views on evolution itself. What we're seeing is more consistent with a punctuated equilibrium model rather than gradual change, notes Dr. Wong. The Tibetan timeline indicates that human evolution can experience periods of relative stasis followed by rapid transformation when environmental conditions demand it. This understanding extends to cultural adaptation as well. The accelerated genetic changes in Tibetans were complemented by equally rapid cultural innovations, from architectural techniques to specialized agricultural practices, all developed within the same compressed time frame. The Tibetan example demonstrates that biological and cultural adaptation can proceed in tandem, explains Dr. Williams. Genetic adaptations provided the physiological foundation for survival, while cultural innovations maximized the adaptive advantage those genetic changes conferred. Understanding how Tibetans adapted their oxygen management systems could inform treatments for conditions like chronic pulmonary disease, sleep apnea, and altitude sickness. If human physiology can transform so dramatically within a compressed evolutionary timeframe, similar plasticity might be activated therapeutically. As we look back at the remarkable journey of adaptation on the Tibetan Plateau, we see not just a story of survival, but a revelation about our species itself. The boundaries of what humans can achieve have been continuously redrawn throughout history. The Tibetan case dramatically demonstrates our adaptive capacity, challenging fundamental assumptions about human limitations. What might this mean for our future? As we face climate change and dream of distant worlds, the Tibetan example reminds us that adaptation is embedded in our DNA. Their story invites us to wonder what's seemingly impossible. Frontiers might our children's children one day call home?